Welcome to the King of Iron Fist Tournament 7, Leroy Smith. New challenger. Get ready for the next battle.
Time to take out the trash.
Round 1. Fight. KO. Round 2. Fight. KO. Round 3. Fight. You lose.
What's on this?
New challenger. Get ready for the next battle. Round one. Fight. KO. Round two. Fight. Perfect. Round three. Fight. KO. Round four. Fight. KO. Final round. Fight. Perfect. You lose. New challenger. New challenger. Get ready for the next battle.
Potato. God. No, no. It's hard. Potato. I got it. I got him. Wait, why did I explode?
Time to take out the trash.
This will be fun.
Round one. Fight. Perfect. Round two. Fight. Fight. KO. You lose.
We got him.
What's done is done.
We got him.
Get ready for the next battle.
Oh, there you are. Boy, that's not it.
This should be fun.
Round 1. Fight. Perfect. Round 2. Fight.
Oh my god. There you are.
KO.
Got him.
Round 3. Fight.
Hey, you son of a gun. Come on.
Perfect. You win.
You're going out with nothing to show for it.
New challenger. New challenger. Get ready for the next battle.
Oh no, nothing. No, he's stupid. Ah, come on. Everyone is stupid. What is wrong? I was having fun. Yeah. Wait, what? Oh, thanks. Rocket launcher. Oh dear. Oh no, oh no, I don't. Oh, come on, he's stupid.
Round 1. Fight.
He's so stupid. He killed himself. What did I miss? Oh, is this
KO. Round 2. Fight. KO. Round 3. Fight.
My cousin. Oh no! The killer's here! No, my cousin.
KO.
I think he'll be alive.
Round 4. Fight.
Yo, Sheik, how are you, man? I'm fine, thanks. How about you? Didn't realize you were
Don't take it personally.
there, man. So yeah, just chilling again with Leroy.
Battle.
You're still playing PUBG right now? Come to think of it, probably I'm pretty sure they're gonna nerf Leroy sooner. So why not make the most of it? Too baggy.
KO. Round 2. Fight. KO. Round 3.
No, he's dropping 2 bars. That is fine. Can even connect the combos as well.
Round 4. Fight.
Why is it so hard? Daddy? Daddy? I need him
It's just business.
Don't take it down here. Daddy,
Mm-hmm.
this is same.
Yeah.
Daddy, I or Gmod.
That looks like Gmod. So I'm gonna remove it as well.
New challenger.
It's not the same. It's not the same.
Ah,
New challenger. Get ready for the next battle.
Oh no! Wait, where did it go? What happened? Where the heck were
Round
are you ready?
fight.
Spinning Godaro kick.
KO. Round 2. Fight.
Louis.
Here we go.
KO. Round 3.
Lucky
Fight.
Louis.
Perfect.
Alright.
You lose.
Let's see if we still wanna fight. Yeah, obviously he will.
Get ready for the
But
next
once-
battle.
Once he probably gets... Once he probably lose, I don't think he's gonna continue fighting.
Are you ready?
I think the only way for you to continue with the match with Leroy is
Round
not
1.
to win.
Fight. KO. Round 2.
That tail though.
Fight.
Look at those damage.
Here we go.
KO. Round 3. Fight. KO. Round 4. Fight.
know that.
You lose.
Okay, na pick one. Potato. Potato. Gimme. Prince, can you get the
Get
potato?
ready for the next battle. Round one. Fight. KO. Round two. Fight. KO. Round three.
What?
Fight. KO. Round four. Fight. KO. You
I bet he doesn't want to fight anymore.
You're going out with nothing to show for it.
Just like everyone else. Oh, that's fine.
get ready for
That's
the
fine.
next
Kudus,
battle.
kudus, kudus.
Oh, come on!
Oh, come on.
Round one. Fight. KO. Round two. Fight. KO. Round three. Fight. KO. Round four.
What happened? Okay.
Fight. KO. You lose.
ラッキークロエでした。 Oh no!
Get ready for the next battle.
I think Jim was better.
Are you ready?
Round 1. Fight. KO. Round 2. Fight.
Here we go.
Round 3. Fight. You win.
You're going out with nothing to show for it.
Get ready for the next battle.
Are you ready?
Round 1. Fight.
Here we go. Finish.
KO. Round 2. Fight. Great. Round 3. Fight. KO. Round 4. Fight. Perfect. You win.
Say goodbye rematch.
Get ready for the next battle. Round one. Fight. Perfect. Round two. Fight. KO. Round three. Fight.
One, two, here we go.
Hey, Dad.
KO. You win.
You're going out with nothing to show for it.
There was a secret right here. Once I find my laptop, I was actually playing.
New challenger.
Go in there, and there was this sneaking. Now, you stupid.
Get ready for the next battle. Round one.
Leroy.
Perfect. Round two. Fight. KO. Round three. Fight. KO. Round four. Fight. KO. You lose. Gotcha. challenger. New challenger. Get ready for the next battle.
Yombe, 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 be, be. Sounds like a zombie.
Round one. Fight. KO. Round two. Fight. KO. Round three. Fight. KO. You win.
Come on, sugar.
Get ready for the next battle. Round one. Fight. KO. Round two. Fight. Perfect. Round three. Fight. KO. Round four. Fight. KO. You win. Get ready for the next battle. Round one. Fight. KO. Round two. Fight. Great. Round three. Fight. KO. You win.
Come on, you.
Get ready for the next battle.
Time to take.
Round one. Fight. KO. Round two. Fight. KO. Round three. Fight. KO. Round four. Fight. Get ready for the next battle. Round one. Fight. 2. Fight. KO. Round 3. Fight. Great. Round 4. Fight. KO.
Yeah.
Final round. Fight.
You wanna blow it? Yeah, of course. It comes with a straw as well.
Going out with nothing.
Get ready for the next battle. Round 1. Fight.
Daddy. Daddy.
It's already locked, I think.
It's not locked.
Yes, it is.
KO. Round 2. Fight. KO.
Good job.
Round 3. Fight. KO. Round 4. Fight. Weak. ready for the next battle.
Time to take out the trash.
Round one. Fight.
Yeah, those.
KO. Round two. Fight. KO. Round three. Fight. KO. Round four. Fight. KO. You win.
Yes, I did it. I have a shiny.
Get ready for the next battle.
You have a shiny corner. Thank you. Orange was orange. Was times.
Time to take out the trash.
Round one. Fight. KO. Round two. Fight. KO. Round three. Fight. KO. Final round. Fight. You win.
Get out
You're
of here.
going out with nothing to show.
Get ready for the next battle.
Oh no! He's going. Go, 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 go. Guys, look at this.
Round one. Fight.
Yo, Hulk, what's up, man? I haven't practiced to be fair.
Round two. Fight.
I only played Leroy since yesterday when we... Was that yesterday when we were playing? That was yesterday, right?
KO.
What? 2 days ago? Oh, yeah, because yesterday I was playing video. Green. What are you doing? What were you doing?
Round four.
Go. Too many matches I've had. Really? I remember. Yeah, I think that was 2 days ago because I was playing like the whole day. I was playing Black Desert Online. Black Desert Online mobile. Yesterday I was just so tired to play anything.
Get ready for the next battle.
How's your Leroy so far? Well, for me to be honest, I kind of find him a little bit boring to use now. But at least this guy is skipping the match from me. most of the opponents are just if they're gonna see Leroy, they're not gonna continue the match. You know what I mean?
KO. Round two. Fight.
Yeah, of course. I forgot about it.
You're done.
KO.
I think so. Yeah, he kind of struggles against Law and King because their attacks are not directly mid. Like I told you, I had this. I had this opponent which is so good at King. And Leroy's parry are nothing against King's elbow.
KO. Round 4.
Yeah.
Fight.
He doesn't use that. I feel like people need to be more careful about gun.
You going
Oh,
out?
man, Gundryu is given.
Daddy,
Even in the past. Yeah? Alright. You got money. Good job.
Get ready.
Even in the past Tekken series.
Then 2030 ay naani ka nga battery, di na pwede no?
Pwede ka pa? Pwede ka pa?
Ha? Di ang sizes manggod pareha ba dig size?
Oh.
May number di ba no? Ang sizes.
Tap.
Round 1. Fight.
Yeah, of course.
KO. Round 2.
And he's got this crazy cancels, man. Oh! I thought I was dead.
Great.
People just see a new character and want to complain about it.
Fight.
I think the guys that were complaining was that they are having problem dealing with Leroy. Every now and then we got a character that's so difficult to figure it out which one's it. Oh, he's got a mirror match.
KO. You lose.
Like right now, nobody's complaining about
Get ready for
Liu Wulung's damage. Nobody. I think the only thing that they can legitimately complain about Leroy is how easy you can use him.
2. Fight.
What the heck? Why? Oh, are we in the at the bottom now? He doesn't really use that combo.
KO.
Yeah, yeah.
Fight.
The orbital. I'm not really shocked about the orbital. Yeah, the down 1-2. Or you meant this one?
Great.
Yep.
Fight.
The main man Sui even said that Leroy doesn't have weakness. Well, to be fair, Leroy's got lots of weakness. Just imagine if you miss that parry. It's wide open.
KO.
It's so wide open if you miss that parry.
You win.
You're going out with nothing to show for it.
Like for example, I had this
Get ready for the next.
that's what I told you about King, that guy who was using King. He took advantage of the way how I use the parry thing. And that leaves me like, we had like 10 matches that I didn't even win once. I've been trying to exploit the parry when he's been trying to use that against me.
Round 1. Fight.
Didn't know that was launch. It's so hard.
KO.
I think right now most people are shocked with Leroy because if it's a music, Leroy is an offbeat, man. You don't punch him after he punch you. So fine. 4-4, 4-2.
Round 3. Fight.
Oh, really? I hate that 4-4. It doesn't really do me much. forgot about the Hell Sweep.
Round 4. Fight.
What am I doing? It's the TE2. It's a Mad Catz TE2. I just got it recently. Oh, did you know that Razer is on a 50% right now? If you're looking for a stick. You up whenever you play the up forward 3-4? Up forward 3-4. No. This one. No.
This is gonna hurt.
Up forward 3. Oh yeah, no. Not at all.
You're done.
Really do it. Oh yeah, that's nice.
You lose.
It's currently on sale right now.
You're going
I was
out
tempted, but I really got a
so full.
stick anyway, so yeah. And I don't do PS4
Get
anymore,
ready for the next
so
battle.
this is fine for me. Why do you have missing input? I don't think I. Yeah, well, most of the time I do have missed input, and that's entirely on me. Because
Round 1.
I mash buttons a lot.
Fight.
Oh, what?
KO. Round 2. Fight.
Try and do that. Okay, let me see. No, I haven't noticed it really, to be fair.
KO. Round 3. Fight.
Ooh, what? Oh, that's weird. Just like that.
Great. Round 4.
Fight. Before I got this T2, I had the Hori Rap, the Tekken 7 version, but unfortunately that had a broken board on it, so I had to replace it with the one in Amazon. And then when I got this Mad Catz, I sold my Hori. Oh. Me win.
KO.
What? How old is your stick right now?
You win.
Come on, sugar.
Get ready for the next battle.
Mechanical button. Is there any stick that doesn't have mechanical button? I think that is that a Sanwa, right?
Round 1.
Yeah, that should still be fine.
KO. Round 2. Fight. Perfect. Round 3.
Really? Oh, did you mod it? You done?
You win.
Oh, really?
Come
Oh,
on, sugar.
did you create it? Did you make it?
Get
Old
ready for the
Pantera
next
has
battle.
invited you to play Tekken 7 by. Oh, I'm gonna play with Mark after if this guy doesn't want a rematch. But you won. Only the 6%. Someone's calling. Yo, what's up? I'm not sure if you can hear me. Yeah?
Round 1. Fight.
Hello?
Yo, what's up, bro?
Laro tayo Tekken.
Hang on. After this guy.
Okay.
No, it came out like that. Oh, really? I thought that racers are using Sanwa buttons and stick as well. Because I had a eto, meron kausap ko sa ano, sa Twitch.
Okay. Well, you can actually customize it if you want.
Because I had a I forgot what was the name. Atrox, Racer Atrox before, and it's made of Sanwa. That's why I thought all racers are made of Sanwas.
KO.
Dude, by the way, I'm using a keyboard, so take it easy on me.
No problemo.
Actually, no, don't take it easy on me. Stop that.
KO. Round 4. Fight.
But I never complained really. Yeah, I think racers nowadays. I mean, with the Pantera,
doing?
KO.
They're very good, but I'm starting to doubt now since this is.
Going out with nothing to show for.
But if that is still 6 months, then that should still have warranty, right?
I thought Razer's supposed to have 1 year warranty though.
Yeah, that should have 1 year warranty. Why the heck did I click on? What am I clicking on?
Oh god.
Offline? Nope.
How much longer, man? Waiting for you.
I'm just gonna have to create a session.
Okay. Oh,
And
not you. Okay.
where are you at? Where are you at?
The US.
They're very good.
Wait,
True,
what?
might send them an email or something. Yeah, you should, man. While it's still fresh.
Wait, what's the name? Can you invite me again?
Hang on.
I actually have the game open right now.
There you go. Invite sent.
I'm on the way. Hey,
Where did you bought them anyway? Did you bought them from the Razer store? The Razer website, or yeah, you bought them from a physical store instead?
Welcome to the
Maybe
King of
online?
Iron Fist Tournament
Probably
7,
bought it
Leroy
online.
Smith.
ask him if he has the receipt.
Yeah, online usually that much. What's a death match? Well, man, good luck with their warranty. From where are you, by the way? If you're in London, they just opened a shop in London, like last Saturday. I went there, by the way. Like I went there at 9 a.m. and I was able to go inside the store at 12. It was so cold outside, and I've got some freebies like this one, the lanyard, and this one is which is very cool. Remove before flight, and a bunch of stickers and big stickers and oh, what happened?
Welcome to the King of Iron Fist Tournament 7, Leroy Smith.
Dude, hurry up.
What's going on?
I don't know.
Tell me what's going on.
Pwede siya gan. Kung may free one-day delivery, pwede na ko ni.
Prime.
Ana.
Well, Hulk, if you're in London, you can probably just drop it in their in the Razer store.
The game loading on your end or no?
Communication error, dude.
What the fuck?
You what? You left?
I did not left.
You left me behind, bro. I think we are having problem with the connection right now because
Yeah, I'm still in the Philippines server.
yeah.
We're in the NA server.
Wait, you mean you're in London right now?
There we go.
Welcome to the King of Iron Fist Leroy Smith.
Because I went to the store opening, bro.
Hurry up and pick a stage, man.
Sinking.
Daddy, don't have
What shooting gun? Oh, you mean the Counter-Strike?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can. After these match, we can play Counter-Strike.
Please.
Come on, launch it. Launch it. We can play. Oh man, we're having a problem. Ah, you left again. That's probably because of our connection. Northampton. What the heck? You're just... What was the Northampton again? Ah, yeah, it's not that far, I guess. Yeah, I'm gonna have to invite you one more time, even, and if it's not gonna let us play.
Oh, did you already invited me like... It's okay, you've already invited me like 3 times.
Yeah, one more time. Let's try it. It's probably because of the location.
Them.
Yeah, it's probably because of the location.
The King of Iron Fist
And have a
Leroy
sword
Smith.
fight. Wah, wah, wah. Oh. Ah. Ooh, 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 ooh. Ooh, ooh, down. Ooh, ooh, down. Ooh.
Oh, be careful.
Yeah, you might pop. Bam, bam, bam. Come on, practice. Like an artist. This one. Right hand.
You're not that far from the Razer store, man. You should have pop in the store last time
Left, and then
when
down,
they open it up. They have
down. No.
they have freebies.
Down, and then up. Up. No.
And they have this gaming room downstairs.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1,
Although I think they were planning to have it rent with anyone who wants to rent it.
then down. 3, 4.
Nah, man. You left again.
I didn't step.
Yep.
Yep, giddy up, yup. It doesn't let us.
It's supported.
It won't let us.
Right. Hide your wallet. You might dust your wallet.
Well, what you gonna do?
No, we can't do anything about it.
This tournament's Leroy
It's a
Smith.
server, or it's not a server because this is a P2P, and I think our connection doesn't let us in. Yeah, we were trying to. Hey, come on. We were trying to have a match, but unfortunately, yeah, he's a robot. He's an android.
Let's start.
Our connection doesn't let us in. That's a robot. Do you want to play this game? Come on, you might hit the monitor.
Boop up,
New challenger.
boop up.
Get ready for the next battle.
Up. Boop up.
What happened to your Counter Strike now?
Too slow.
Warung. I'm sorry, dude. It doesn't let us.
Stinky. Stinky.
It's okay.
Stinky.
Prince.
Stinky. Stinky. Daddy is stinky.
Do you want to play Call of Duty instead?
I don't have Call of Duty, man.
Round 1.
I should buy it.
Fight.
I'm not rich enough for that yet.
I'm getting hammered by Hwoarang.
KO. Round 2. Fight. KO. Round 3.
We waiting every night.
You finally rolling inside.
What have I done? That should be a wall standing.
KO.
Getting hammered. Did it show no bars when you try to?
Fight.
Yeah. It was definitely a no bars. I really love that.
Round. Fight.
Missed it. Ah.
KO.
Wrong. I hope that he wants a rematch. Okay, that's good.
Get ready for the next battle.
There's one trick if you want a rematch with Leroy. You don't have to win. Yeah. That could be it as well. Because back when I was still in Bournemouth, that's the reason why I wasn't able to play Tekken.
Take out the
Round.
Because my NAT was so strict. That sidestep. That was the very reason why I wasn't able to play Tekken.
In a bedroom.
KO.
No, I
Round
didn't
2.
say bedroom.
Fight.
Should be in there. Does the match still works?
What does?
Hamachi. It's like a VPN. Ooh, drop it.
KO.
Check his setting.
Round 3. Fight.
Uh-huh. Ah.
KO.
What specific settings, man?
Fight.
You mean the router settings?
KO.
Because if you're
Final round.
asking if the router settings, that's a big problem in the Philippines right now. I don't think he has the access to the router. No, I don't think he has the access to that.
You're going out with nothing to show.
I've tried that when I was there, and it's locked.
Get ready for the next battle.
That's the reason why our net there is so strict. I think the only provider there that will support OpenNAP is what they call the other internet provider other than PLDT and Globe. Huh? Ah, Converge.
Round one.
You can try it, Converge, man.
Fight. KO. Round
That is really devastating, that down thing.
Go, sugar.
Doesn't even let sugar out.
Go, sugar.
That's gonna be huge.
KO.
That's too slow.
Round three. Fight.
Why was I jumping?
Oh no. Jeez.
KO. Round four. Fight.
Down, forward, 1 and 2? This one? No! I miss it.
KO. Final round.
Down, backward, 3, 2. Oh, yeah. Hell sweep. That's just...
KO.
Down, forward, 1 and 2.
You win.
Down, forward, 1 and 2.
Come on, sugar.
And also down, backward. Oh, yeah. I know about the hell sweep, but down, forward, 1 and 2. I don't really use that much. Kudos to this guy. I thought he give me a match when he lose. Most of the guys doesn't want a rematch against Leroy. So yeah. Up forward too is good.
You salty.
Yeah.
Oh, you fucking salty.
There's lots of guys who do that. Does that as well. What am I doing?
What are you doing, my friend?
Just finish his life. No! I really don't know how to use that.
Round 2. Fight.
Up, forward, parries. Down forward.
This is gonna hurt.
No. Up, forward. Is that a parries?
Fight.
This one? Yeah, that part is good. Okay. No.
Round 4. Fight.
You know I always do that. Did I let go?
Let it go.
Ooh, that's hurt.
KO.
Really? I didn't know. Up, forward, one.
Really?
Get ready for the next battle.
That's. I think that's the reason why I couldn't even beat you, because I keep doing things. Everything is just the same. Keep doing things repeatedly.
Round 1.
That's why I can't beat you, man.
Fight.
And also Hermit 1 does that. Alright.
Round 2. Fight.
Damn sugar.
What happened? Up. Ah, what? No.
KO.
Why? He always fall for that.
Round 3. Fight. Round 4.
Can't believe he fell for that.
Man, Jin Shao sleep is so slow.
I doubt he he wants a rematch after this one. He was trapped, yeah. I doubt him. Oh, kudos to this guy. Kudos to this guy. He got trapped.
Round 1.
Down, back, 1 and 2.
Fight.
No. I didn't know. It failed me. Nope. I was trying to troll him.
Fight.
He didn't learn.
Round 3.
No, I didn't know.
Fight.
Down backward. Oh. Oi. Oi, 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 oi.
KO. Round 4. Fight.
Ah, I missed. And he doesn't. Oh, what?
Very creative. Show the daddy your creation.
Final round.
What is it?
Fight.
And he moves. And he moves again.
KO.
Oh, that's nice. That's cool. Good job. High five.
Come on, sugar.
Get ready for the next battle.
I do have what?
I bet he's trying to read me more
Do we have
than I ever read him.
this?
Like a book.
Yeah. He's downloading my moveset.
Dad, you made a socks?
I bet he already figured out that I keep repeating things.
What?
Round 1. Fight.
Did I let go?
KO. Round 2. Fight.
Move!
KO. Round 3. Fight. KO. Round 4. Fight.
Hey, dude, have you seen the new King of Fighters games on mobile?
All Stars?
Yeah, where they put second characters in it.
Yeah, of course. But I'm not playing it anyway. Like, I only play recently
KO.
Black Desert Online mobile.
Fight.
Oh.
He will eventually get used to that. Yeah, I think so. But I guess not. Oh crap. Oh, that was the last match. I was supposed to be my promotion.
Get ready for the next battle.
Man, Kazumi, you don't learn.
I was supposed to be my promotion. Let go.
Wait, what happened?
Yeah, I didn't move. Ga-update yung one Cisco.
Take out the dragon.
Round 1. Fight. KO. Round 2. Fight.
Oof.
Right? Hey.
Why is it different? Wait!
KO.
Daddy!
What?
Round 3.
What is that?
Fight.
What?
Hang on. I'm gonna finish this and then we'll play that.
Who was playing with me?
Yeah, I will play with you. He doesn't know which way.
KO. Round
All right,
4.
go ahead.
Fight.
He doesn't know how to deal with that move yet. But
Get ready for
well, are you counting for my promotion right now? I'm gonna have a few more match and then I'm gonna have to go play with my kid with his Counter Strike.
Round 1. Fight.
It's starting. All right. All right, you can play ahead. I'll play with you.
Perfect. Round 2.
Wait, did I get promoted?
Fight.
And are you daddy stupid Freddy? Hey, hey, hey.
KO. Round 3. Fight.
I love that move. It's not simple, but it's. Oh, I missed that move. Nah, unfortunately, it won't kill him though. It's like nothing. Oh, it did.
Round 4. Fight. Final round. Fight.
I love that move. Why did I grab?
You win.
Oh, I got promoted.
Come on, sugar.
They're still below. Oh,
Get ready for the next.
Why do people level up in promos? Oh, what do you mean? What do you mean level up?
God, I hate Blake so much.
Oh, I guess the ranks are supposedly the levels, right? Oh yeah. I get that. Pressure.
Round one. Fight. KO.
I guess
Round two.
pressure as well.
Fight.
Oof, that hurts. Uh-huh.
KO.
That hurts.
Round three. Fight. KO. Round four.
Yeah,
Fight.
thanks for dropping by. I'm gonna have to play with my kid Counter-Strike.
oh my god. Oh my god.
KO.
Die.
You win.
You're going out with nothing to show for it.
Yeah, sure, no problem. You should have told me. Right, bye. Oh, hey, Manu. See you next time, bro. Just drop me an invite whenever you want. Kudos to you, man, for giving me matches with even with Leroy. See you next time, Manu.
Extras. I know we can make it. We don't want to lose. Oh no. That's fine.